Okay, so the next thing we're going to look at is habitat shape. Habitat shape is all about how much of the habitat is close proximity to surrounding types of habitat. So how close to the edge is it? So a long, thin habitat like this, if we say that a couple of meters in is sort of a buffer between the fields around it and the woodland in the center like this. On the edge here, we will have quite light conditions and temperature changes. So it's sort of a bit halfway between the center of the wood and the field surrounding it. And then we have our core habitat in the center here. So this is our core and this is our edge. As opposed to a similar total area habitat, you can see that our edge habitat will be of a smaller proportion of the total area. We've got like a larger core habitat protected in the center here. So that's the core and that's the edge. Now this is fine. It just depends on what type of species you are trying to conserve. So some species require core habitat abiotic conditions. So perhaps they are very shade-loving organisms that live in the woods, or they might be edge habitat abiotic conditions. So it could be that in a large forest you cut rides through it and open it up so that you have these edge habitats throughout the forest, or you try and just keep as much of it towards a core. So if you have a meadow which requires nutrient poor conditions, you don't want it too close to surrounding agricultural practices where they're spraying fertilizer, for example, that might drift onto the core habitat. Next one then is habitat diversity. So habitats are rarely uniform. They are typically a complex structure. And this is both the community and the abiotic conditions. And a complex structure means that we have a range of abiotic factors, and this will result in a wide range of niches. And this will result in a big amount of biodiversity. So this complex structure, this habitat diversity, will result in lots of biodiversity because there's lots of different niches. So a back garden, perhaps you'd want a little pond and some trees and some grass and some flowers, like all different things, rather than just have a lawn or all just having trees. So you can have that biodiversity built in through a complex structure. Next one is light levels. So this is where we might have a tree, sort of a regenerated forest, so all the trees are about the same age. So already we can see that we don't have that habitat diversity. It would be better than just like an agricultural field, obviously. And it means that the canopy will be relatively dense. This dense canopy then of uniform age trees will result in a lot of shading because they're blocking out the sunlight. And this might mean that what we can do is to increase the level of diversity and change the light levels at ground level, is we can selectively fell which means cut down a couple of the trees spread out throughout the whole forest, just so we end up with little patches with more sunlight. And this will allow light into our low-lying plants, typically like flowers and things like that, and brambles, and that will give us that sort of range of different food sources and resources. So you'll end up with insects enjoying the sunlight because it can warm them up, sort of fruits and flowers that small mammals like dormice can exploit, and they still have the shelter surrounding it as well. So the light level is quite important. Water depth is an important one that we sort of met before when we were doing plagio-climaxes. So in a watercourse, it will go potentially from deep to being quite shallow waters. In the deep water, you will only have free-floating weeds and algae because it's too deep for anything to take root and get its nutrients. As the water gets shallower and light can start to reach towards the bottom, you will have rooted, submerged aquatic plants. And these will benefit from being able to get their nutrients from the sediment at the bottom of the pond and being anchored using their roots. As we get a little bit shallower again, it will be shallow enough that we can have rooted plants with floating leaves. So like water lilies and stuff like that. Quite rooted, submerged. Let's put that in there. So these ones here are rooted, floating, leaved aquatic plants, which will obviously shade out everything underneath them. So this, you start finding the abiotic conditions will change because it's shaded. And then on the very edges, you will have emergent vegetation, things like rushes, reeds, water mint, bulrushes, those sort of things. These are our emergent rooted aquatic plants. And different species will have different requirements. So you might find that frogs like to, and toads, or frogs mainly, might hibernate, or terrapins or something like that in the bottom of deeper water, but then they also need the shallow water for their laying the eggs. So their frog spawn will be in the shallows where it doesn't get too deep for them. That's my frog spawn, in case you're wondering. Or you might find that damselfly nymphs need to climb onto emergent vegetation so that they can go through their metamorphose and turn into lovely damselflies. So it just depends on what conditions they need. And our vegetative age structure. So a lot of British woodlands are not particularly ancient. They're regenerated woods or previously used for coppicing. and their age structure will be very uniform. So we got a uniform age structure. If it was a more natural wood, what we would find perhaps is that we have things like some really big, old, emergent, ancient trees. We might find that we have some standing deadwood. And this variety of different ages provides a range of different habitats. So things like detritivores that can eat the standing deadwood. So this allows us to have this range of different conditions, and we can try and simulate this by how we cut trees back. Do we tidy our woodlands up to get rid of trees that have died from disease or from storms, or do we leave them standing? How you cut the branches can have a big impact. So do you leave it like clean cut to the base of the trunk, or do you leave it jagged so things can like eat and grow in it? Do we have clearings where light can reach the understory and ground level? Do we have these emergent trees with their heavy load of insects and complex structure? And do we have a healthy collection of new trees that are growing on, ready to take over when the larger ones finish their life cycle? All of these provide us with different niches and conditions. So we could use things like selective felling again